Depends on who you talk to in Trump world. The ones that you know are leaking to reporters. We got this. We're going to reduce their political bones to dust if they stand. You know, those people are saying, "Oh, we got the." You talk to actual senators and people close to them. They will tell you there's still 5, 6, 7, 8 that are pretty hard nosed. It is interesting that there was a focus on Gates. Now there's the focus on Hegseth. Yesterday, Susan Collins, they did not sit around and hold hands and sing Kumbaya yesterday. Susan Collins let everybody know where she stood. She's going to go through the process, but she very pointedly says, I want to look at the FBI background check before making any decision. That was not a win. Maybe some of the people on their little podcasts can say that was a win today and scream and yell and flex their muscles. But I will tell you there's another problem. And that is, and the New York Times is talking about it right now, the land of sand and death. The disruptions in Syria puts Tulsi Gabbard in the center of the spotlight. Hard for me to believe, even in this cynical age, that Republicans who have spent their entire life concerned about the intelligence community and building the intelligence community and giving a damn about the intelligence community, just like the FBI, are going to are going to go ahead and vote for somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, who they have openly said, we are very concerned about her statements that sounded supportive of Assad and very concerned that even Russian media considers her to be a close ally of Vladimir Putin and, again, just repeating Russian talking points. I find that hard to believe that there are not going to be 4 Republican senators to vote no with her, with Hegseth, and yes, with Kash Patel, a guy who said he's going to close the FBI on day one and that he's going to run around arresting journalists or charging them civilly.
Yeah, certainly for Tulsi Gabbard, the spotlight on Syria not helpful to her chances here. She just, even over the weekend, was again featured on RT, the Russian propaganda television network, in a supportive way. As far as Patel goes, I was talking to someone in Trump world yesterday who was gleeful about Wray's decision to step down. Like, just gleeful. Like, we don't have to spend any capital fighting him. This is another sign that we've intimidated Washington. We're breaking the process. And in this case, they're right. We don't know that will be the case for all of their nominees, but they have managed to avoid this fight with Wray. Though I do think that now that Wray is stepping aside, there will be more scrutiny on Kash Patel going forward. Like, he's managed to avoid the spotlight to this point, Ken Dilanian, but that's going to shift now with more focus on him. So my question to you is, as someone who covers this day in and day out, we know, Joe went through it, we know what Kash Patel has promised to do were he to be confirmed. Will there be people in the FBI who will carry out his orders? Will there be resignations, or will there be loyalists, people who will say, I will do that, even if it's morally or legally questionable?
I don't think there are going to be very many people inside the FBI who are willing to carry out illegal orders, when you put it that starkly, Jonathan. And by the way, I should just say that taking Wray's place here as the acting director on January 20th will be Paul Abate, who is not a man that Trump world loves at all. In fact, Paul was key to the decision to search Mar-a-Lago. And so for them, it's not a win in terms of Paul Abate. And in order to replace him as an acting director before Kash Patel is confirmed, they would have to find another Senate confirmed figure or someone within the FBI. So just putting that out there. But to get back to your question, look, David is absolutely right. Current and former FBI officials are very, very concerned about Kash Patel, in part because he lacks the qualifications in the history of people who ran the FBI to lead the nation's premier law enforcement agency. He doesn't even know how it works. He doesn't know how the place functions. But the FBI is a rule of law organization. After the abuses of Hoover, a lot of safeguards and guardrails were put in place around the awesome surveillance powers of the FBI. And in order to get around them, you have to do a lot of suspect things that are flagged along the way. I mean, there's the reason an FBI lawyer went to jail for lying on a form in the Carter Page FISA situation is because there was a paper trail there. There are layers and layers of oversight and review of these surveillance applications. So look, there are MAGA FBI agents. There are people inside the FBI, many people who support Donald Trump, but there aren't a lot of people, I would argue, willing to do things that are outside of their oath of office to fulfill some political agenda. And if Kash Patel tries to order people to do that, he's going to find that on the front page of the major newspapers very quickly. Does that mean he can't make mischief? Absolutely not. There's a lot that can happen behind the scenes, but I'm more optimistic than maybe some other people about that the guardrails can hold in an institution like the FBI.
Right. NBC's Kenny Delaney, and thank you so much for your reporting. This is the thing I always explain to politicians, especially politicians that are going into the White House or people that are going into the White House. The intel community is going to get you coming, and they're going to get you going. You could talk to George W. Bush about that during the Iraq War. You know what? People that it was like split. Half of the CIA agents who are against it going, oh, yeah, this yellow cake stuff, that's bullshit. And it would be leaked to the New York Times. You know, Barack Obama's targeting people like himself personally. That gets leaked to the New York Times. Like there's a split in the 2016 campaign. And this is what's so wild about the whole idea. Oh, it's politicized. It's for this side or it's for. No, the New York office, you know, they were against Hillary Clinton. They didn't like Hillary Clinton. We knew that during the 2016 campaign. The D.C. office didn't like Donald Trump. And Donald Trump got elected the first time because James Comey, after not indicting Hillary Clinton, decides he's going to hold a press conference and say, yeah, for the first time, by the way. Yeah, she's not guilty, but, oh, she's politically guilty, which was just an outrageous norm. And then 10 days before the election, we know exactly what he did. The FBI screws up on both sides. They're politicized on both sides. You can look at James Comey and look at the mistakes that he made. Ask the Clintons today about what he did and how he elected Donald Trump. You look at what happened afterwards. This Steele dossier, which we said from the very beginning was nonsense. They're doing the Steele dossier, the Carter Page FISA apps. They screw up. They're human beings. But there are people who like Republicans in the FBI and who like Democrats in the FBI. And Trump world running around saying what they're saying. It's just absolutely ridiculous, Willie, because they have short-term or long-term memory loss. They don't know what it is now. It was the FBI. It was James Comey who gave Donald Trump basically a life raft to paddle to shore and win the election 10 days before. It was over until James Comey did what he did.
I think you might have heard about that from Bill Clinton a few days ago.
I
sat
did.
down with the president.
I did.
Sat down. That lingers.
They do.
For
They
obvious
do not
reasons.
forget.
No, they do not forget.
For good reason.
You know, there's another interesting element to this, which is a little bit of blowback on the pressure campaign that's being brought on Senate Republicans. So you have people like Lisa Murkowski coming out of those meetings saying the calls we're getting, the pressure we're getting from Trump people are not appreciated. She's saying politely what I think a lot of senators are saying, which is back off. We have an advise and consent role here. Not all senators, obviously, a lot of them will go along with whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. But you have Heritage putting up ads saying we're going to primary you unless you vote for all of these people. You're getting pressure from outside podcasters.
They had tried that with Lisa Murkowski, right?
Yeah,
that didn't work too well. And by the way, don't you still have ranked choice voting in Alaska? Yeah. So actually, taking the middle ground and being responsible actually pays off there. But and also Tom Cotton running around going, I am the enforcer. You all better vote for every one of these people. Do you know how well that plays with fellow senators?
No.
What do they say about fellow senators? Everyone looks in the mirror and what do they see? The next president of the United States. So, you know what? They don't need Tom Cotton running around playing enforcer. And people that in MAGA world that are going, oh, we've got Tom Cotton on our side. He's yelling at all the other senators. You just sit there and go, where are these people from?
Right. And
because that's not how we in the House call them the House of Lords for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, Jackie Alamany, these are the people you cover every day. There are people like Ted Cruz going out and saying that Donald Trump won with a mandate. You've got to approve everyone he has. Again, he didn't vote for all but one or two, I think, of Joe Biden's choices. He had to be reminded of that this week. So what is your sense of, obviously, Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, those people are going to vote across the board. What is your sense of any pushback from again, all it takes is a handful of Republican senators who don't appreciate, first of all, maybe don't think these people are qualified, but secondly, don't appreciate the pressure campaign being applied from the outside.
Yeah, well, so Joe, I totally hear you on this. There are a number of senators who have experience in batting back against Trump and defecting from him from time to time, especially during the 2016-2020 administration. But this time around, I have been surprised at some of the private conversations I've been having with staffers and lawmakers who don't have as much of an appetite to go against Trump. And even the people who would be ideologically extremely opposed normally to some of these candidates, people like Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, who have very different policy approaches to things like Iran and Syria as Tulsi Gabbard, who would normally come out against her, and not just on the policy, but also ideologically in terms of Gabbard's trajectory from a Democrat to a Bernie Sanders booster to now a prominent Trump backer. But again, we are not seeing that much pushback behind closed doors. Some people have sort of suggested to me that this is going to be akin to the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, where maybe there'll be some opposition and questions and performative grandstanding raised throughout the nomination process, but that ultimately someone like Susan Collins is going to go along with it, someone who's up for election, by the way, in 2026. But Tom Cotton tweeted a few days ago, as you sort of alluded to, that of the 72 cabinet secretary nominees since the Clinton transition, only 2 nominees have ever received no votes from the president-elect's party. And this is a message that is being circulated amongst staffers and between transition officials and staffers. And what we've also heard is that some of even the new lawmakers who have come to the Hill for the first time to serve as senators, again, there is not that much of an appetite to make their mark and take a stand against Trump, that this pressure campaign is working in some ways. I mean, we already saw Joni Ernst backtrack and come down from her position against Hegseth. She's someone who's a survivor of sexual assault in the military, was the first female in combat to serve in the Senate, and now suddenly she is supporting Hegseth through the process. So, we're keeping a close eye on some people who have a bit broader concerns that they've expressed publicly, but right now there seem to be only a core group of 3 who could hold out ultimately against these controversial candidates.
Yeah, we'll see. Jackie, thanks so much for being with us. The Washington Post, Jackie Alemany, greatly appreciated. And of course, you need 4 votes. And by the way, you can throw precedent out the window when you've got one guy who has said once he's FBI director, he's going to shut down the FBI and arrest journalists. You got another guy that has